I'm Cliff Ribner, and I'm going to tell you about how it is that the Senate uses the filibuster in a completely corrupt manner. It's the foundation of all the corruption in Washington, in fact. I've shown you in multiple videos about how the filibuster is completely unconstitutional. It violates the guarantee clause. In the guarantee clause of the Constitution guarantees a Republican form of government, and the federal government guarantees a Republican form of government for itself and for the states. And that word had a very special meaning at the time. It didn't mean that the Republican Party would be in charge. There was no Republican Party. What it meant was majority rule by the elected officials. And I'll read you, this is what Alexander Hamilton said about that in the Federalist 22. The fundamental maxim of Republican government requires that the sense of the majority should prevail. It's literally the definition of what a Republican form of government is. And in the Federalist Papers, for the very few things in there where they permitted where they required supermajority votes, there's just a few of them: expelling a member, convicting someone, a president or a judge or any other official in an impeachment, or when the Senate ratifies a treaty, there have to be 2/3 majority, and overriding a veto. Those are the main ones where a 2/3 majority is required for each of those. Those are supermajority votes. They're specified in the Constitution. They are exceptions to what's supposed to be the rule, because in the guarantee clause, it says they guarantee us a Republican form of government, and that word at the time meant majority rule, voting by all the elected officials who represent represent us. That's what a republic is. It's not a democracy. People don't get to vote on everything directly, but they elect their representatives, and that's what the Republican form of government means. That's one way that the filibuster is unconstitutional. It's also unconstitutional because the vice president in Article 1, Section 5, the vice president is given a vote, but only in one instance only, and that is when they be quote unquote evenly divided. In other words, they have to be evenly divided, or the vice president doesn't get a vote at all. He can't provide the extra vote for a supermajority. That's the one instance, and that alone would be enough. In addition, there's the dead hand rule. If the filibuster rule requires 60 votes to repeal existing legislation, so that the legislatures of the past continue to rule the present. The dead hand rule says that that's completely unconstitutional, and the U.S. Supreme Court recognized that in the Winstar case. That the dead hand rule is part of the unwritten English Constitution, which becomes part of our rule of law. That's being violated by the filibuster, which requires a supermajority vote in which the majority has to get the votes of the minority also. It gives the minority extra power because they have a veto over the majority. The majority can't get what they want without having the minority agree to it. And the founders were very well aware that even in those votes where it's close, so that they can try to get the minority to do it. There's maybe a few of them that are willing to do it, so that maybe they can get over the top. They have to make corrupt deals with the minority, and that's the reason why the Senate has never repealed this. I explained in several previous videos that the origin of the filibuster rule, in which 60 votes are required for the Senate to pass anything or repeal anything, laws or any regulation by those administrative agencies, even though those regulations themselves are unconstitutional. They're not allowed to pass laws. Only the Congress is allowed to pass laws, and yet those regulations are given the force of law. You violate them, they say you committed a felony. Anyway, the Congress is not allowed to manipulate its voting power that way. It's a fundamental feature of a Republican form of government. Article 5 of the Constitution forbids the Senate acting alone to amend the Constitution, and yet they're claiming that they're allowed to have this filibuster rule that completely transforms how the Republic operates, where 60 votes from the Senate have to be obtained to change any law or repeal any law or enact any law. They claim that in Article 1, Section 5, they are given the power to make rules of their proceedings. In other words, housekeeping rules within the Senate. And they're claiming that gives them the power to completely turn the Constitution on its head and transform us from a Republican form of government, which is guaranteed in the guarantee clause. So that's only, and there are other reasons too. I can give you other reasons. Another reason is the fact that the Constitution specifies specific things, which I just enumerated to you before, where supermajorities are required. And in the Federalist Papers, when they justified having those supermajorities, they felt the need to go to great lengths to justify them because they knew that it violated the whole principle of a Republican form of government to ever require a supermajority. But they gave reasons why for each one of those things. There are Federalist Papers about each one of them. The conviction of a president or a judge in an impeachment, the expulsion of a member, having treaties ratified by 2/3, and overriding a veto. They actually have Federalist essays about each of those in which they justify why they could deviate from what a Republican form of government is. Anyway, and I also explained the origin of the filibuster rule, that Aaron Burr, the great traitor who tried to steal half the country together with Mexico and Spain, and he was going to be made king. He tried to do that. He got the General Wilkinson, the general in charge of the army, to go along with it. This was terrible treason that took place in 1806, but they couldn't convict him because our Constitution also changes the common law definition of treason. It requires 2 witnesses, and Aaron Burr was very clever about how he did all his dealings. They couldn't get 2 witnesses, so they had to dismiss the treason, even though his treason was even worse than what Benedict Arnold committed. And Benedict Arnold is the one whose name you remember, but Aaron Burr is the one whose treason is so terrible, we're still living with it today. The filibuster was part of his treason, tricking the Senate into adopting it, because under the Articles of Confederation, which he was very familiar with, he had actually been a patriot during the war. It's just that he was greedy too. He wanted to be king. But during the war, during the revolution itself, he was actually very brave. But he was well aware that while the colonies were living under what was called the Articles of Confederation, we were not a republic yet. We were not a single country. We were 13 countries. Articles of Confederation were basically a treaty, and they required ratification of lots of votes by supermajorities. And it was a catastrophe. It made it very difficult to conduct the war, to get people to, particularly raising taxes. They couldn't raise taxes without a 2/3 vote, and it was a big problem. And that's exactly why he wanted the Senate to adopt a rule, pretending it was just a minor change, where it just affected how people got to speak in the Senate. But what they've done now is that's what it was originally. It permitted senators to speak indefinitely. And only when 60 of them got together could they tell someone to shut up. That was what it was originally. Now they've just dispensed with the whole speaking part. They don't make them stand up there and read the yellow pages the way they used to do, when there used to be a yellow pages. Anyway, now it's just automatic. It's just 60 votes are required for anything to pass in the Senate or anything to be repealed. Anyway, Aaron Burr was the one who got them to do it, and he did it as part of his treason, and we're still living with it today. And the reason the senators have never gotten rid of it, which is what I wanted to make this video really all about, it's very simple. they corruptly benefit from it, because not only do the minority have to be bought off, but the majority's attitude is, well, if we're going to pay off these guys, we're going to give ourselves pork too. So they can't pass anything without pork. And the filibuster, it does multiple corrupt things for them. It gives them an excuse for never passing any of the stuff they promised to pass when they run for office. It's an excuse. They can say, well, I wanted to do it, but we got this rule we have to obey. That's exactly what they do. And what they do is that and the way the filibuster is used, it's like a nuclear weapon. Its real power is not when it's actually used in a real vote, because they don't even bother bringing things to vote unless it's at least close, that they might get close to the 60 votes. But what its main power is simply its existence. The fact that everybody knows the weapon is there, and the fact that they can credibly use it. That's the way a nuclear weapon is used. We use our nuclear weapons every day to frighten our enemies because they know we've got them. So they're not going to attack us. We don't have to drop them on them. Hiroshima took care of what everybody knows what happens when you drop it. So we don't have to do it. We just have to have the credible threat that we'll use it. And that's what the filibuster's real power is. All the things that never even come up for vote, because they all know the filibuster is there. Anyway, the senators benefit from it. That's why they've kept it the whole time. They were happy to be tricked into it, and they know how it can be used to enrich themselves. That's how these people all get rich when they're in office. Chuck Schumer has never had a job outside the government where he made over $200,000 a year. He's worth $80-something million now. How do you think he made all that money? All these guys can become multimillionaires, and the filibuster rule is the way they do it, because it's their excuse for giving pork to the other side and to themselves. Because remember, they have to be voted by their own constituents. They don't want to have to go to their constituents and say, well, we gave pork to this other guy, but we didn't get any. They go and they say, look how great I am. I got all this pork for you. And they literally run on that. And it's a perpetual reelection machine for incumbents. That's another benefit they get from it. And these are the reasons they've kept the filibuster. It's the source of all the corruption in Washington, and it has to be repealed. And the only way that's going to happen is if you put pressure on your senator to do it, or demand that President Trump explain all these things I'm explaining in public so that everybody knows just how corrupt and disgusting the Senate is by keeping this unconstitutional abomination called the filibuster. I'm Cliff Ribner, and if you like what I have to say, please follow me.